Imagine spending decades building a family, sacrificing your dreams, working sleepless nights to give your children the best. And then, on Christmas Eve, your own son pushes you away from the Christmas table. This seat is for my father-in-law. Get out of here. My name is John. I'm 57 years old. For 30 years, I built an empire for my family, paid every bill, every celebration, every dream of theirs. But that Christmas night, I discovered who really mattered to them. The Christmas table that I had paid for, the house that bore my name, the family that I had sacrificed everything for. They pushed me away from the Christmas table like I was a stranger, like I meant nothing. But they had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that pushing me away from the Christmas table would be the biggest mistake of their lives. What happened next will shock you. What I did after being pushed away from my own Christmas table changed everything forever. Before I continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because we publish new stories daily. Leave your like and tell us in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Let me take you back to where it all began. 3 decades ago, I was a young man with big dreams and an even bigger heart. I met Sarah when we were both 25. She was beautiful, ambitious, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We married quickly, and within 2 years, we had our first child, Michael. From the moment Michael was born, I knew my life had changed forever. Not in the way most new fathers describe it, but in a more fundamental way. I made a decision that would define the next 30 years of my life. Every choice I made, every sacrifice I endured, every late night I worked would be for him and the family we were building. I was an accountant at a mid-sized firm, making decent money, but nothing extraordinary. Sarah wanted to stay home with Michael, and I supported that decision completely. It meant tighter budgets, fewer luxuries, but I believed in traditional family values. A mother should be with her children, especially in those crucial early years. When Michael was 3, Sarah got pregnant again. Our daughter Emma arrived, and suddenly we were a family of 4, living on one income in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. The walls felt like they were closing in, but I had a plan. I started taking night classes in business administration while working full-time. Sarah would put the kids to bed, and I'd study until 2 in the morning, then wake up at 6 to get ready for work. The exhaustion was brutal, but I kept my eyes on the prize, a better life for my family. By the time I was 32, I had completed my MBA and started my own accounting firm. Those first few years were terrifying and exhilarating. I worked 16-hour days, building client relationships, handling tax seasons that stretched from January to June without a single day off. Sarah managed everything at home, and I'm grateful for that. But I was building something bigger than just a paycheck. The business grew steadily. By Michael's 10th birthday, we had moved to a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Westchester County. It had a big backyard, a 2-car garage, and most importantly, it was in one of the best school districts in New York. The mortgage was steep, but I could handle it. Michael was brilliant, not just smart, but genuinely gifted. His teachers consistently recommended advanced programs, and he excelled in everything from mathematics to creative writing. Emma was more artistic, drawn to music and dance. I made sure they both had every opportunity available. Piano lessons for Emma costs $200 a month. Michael's math tutoring was $300. Soccer league fees, dance recitals, summer camps, college preparatory courses. I calculated once that between ages 5 and 18, I spent over $40,000 per child on extracurricular activities alone. That doesn't include clothes, cars, college funds, or the countless other expenses that come with raising children who never hear the word no. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. 2 days later, Michael called back with a compromise proposal. Robert and Patricia would host Christmas Eve at their apartment in Manhattan, and Michael and Jessica would host Christmas Day at their house with the original seating arrangements. I listened to his explanation and realized that nothing had fundamentally changed. I was still being managed and accommodated rather than respected and honored. Michael, I said, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Okay. If I had never contributed financially to your life, If I had been just an average father who provided love and guidance, but couldn't help with college or wedding costs or house payments, would you still want me at your Christmas table? There was a long pause. Finally, Michael said, "Of course, you're my father." "Then prove it," I said. "This Christmas, I'm not contributing anything financially. No expensive wine, no special desserts, no Christmas gifts that cost hundreds of dollars. I'm just coming as your father who loves you." "Dad, nobody asked you to spend a lot of money on Christmas. Nobody asked me not to, either. For 30 years, I've shown love through providing and giving. This year, let's see if there's anything left when you take that away." Michael was clearly uncomfortable with this conversation. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this." "I'm not being difficult. I'm being honest. I want to know if you value me as a person or just as a financial resource." "That's not fair." "Fair." I felt anger rising in my voice for the first time. "I've given you everything, Michael. Everything. I worked myself to exhaustion to pay for your education, your wedding, your house. I've never taken a vacation that wasn't centered around family needs. I've never bought myself anything expensive because every extra dollar went to supporting your dreams. I never asked you to do that. You didn't have to ask. That's what fathers do. But now I discover that despite 30 years of sacrifice, I'm secondary to a man who's known you for 3 years. Robert isn't more important than you. Then why does he get the respect and deference that I've never received? Why do you ask his advice, but never mine? Why does he get to sit at the head of my table in the house I helped buy?" Michael was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. Maybe because Robert doesn't make everything about himself. Maybe because he doesn't keep score of every dollar he's spent. Maybe because he treats me like an adult instead of someone who owes him something. Those words cut deep because there was truth in them. I had been keeping score, not because I wanted repayment, but because I wanted recognition. I had been making things about myself because I felt invisible and unappreciated. But Michael's accusation that I didn't treat him like an adult was unfair. I had spent 30 years treating him like someone whose dreams and happiness mattered more than my own. "You're right," I said quietly. "I have been keeping score, but not because I want the money back. I've been keeping score because I want to matter. You do matter. Not the way Robert matters. Not the way someone you actually respect matters." The conversation ended with both of us frustrated and hurt. Michael said he needed time to think, and I agreed. But I had already made my decision about Christmas. 3 days before Christmas Eve, I called Michael one final time. "I've decided not to come to Christmas this year," I said. "Dad, don't be ridiculous. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out. You have your new family structure, and I don't fit into it the way I used to. That's okay. People change. Families evolve. You're being dramatic. I'm being realistic. You don't need me there, Michael. You have Robert to play the patriarch role, Patricia to handle the grandmother duties, and Jessica's family to provide the sophisticated atmosphere you enjoy. What about Mom? What about Madison? Your mother can make her own decision. As for Madison, she seems perfectly happy with her grandmama Patricia. Madison loves you. I know she does. But love isn't the same as need or respect. She'll be fine without me for one Christmas." Michael tried to argue, but I could hear in his voice that part of him was relieved. My absence would eliminate the tension and awkwardness that had been building around these family gatherings. Sarah decided to go to Christmas without me. She didn't agree with my decision, but she understood it. She wanted to see Madison and Emma's twins, and she was better at accepting secondary roles than I was. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my house, the house where Michael and Emma had grown up, where we had celebrated Christmas for 25 years before Robert and Patricia entered our lives. Sarah called me from Michael's house on Christmas Day to describe the celebration. Robert had indeed sat at the head of the table and made a patriarchal toast. Patricia had orchestrated the meal with military precision. Michael had played the perfect host and devoted son-in-law. Did anyone ask about me? I wondered. Michael explained that you weren't feeling well, Sarah said. Robert offered to send over some soup from their cook. Even in my absence, Robert was positioned as the generous, caring father figure. But something interesting happened after Christmas. Without the holiday obligations and family gatherings, I had time to think clearly about what I wanted from the remaining years of my life. I was 57 years old. I had built a successful business, accumulated significant wealth, and provided extensively for my family, but I had never traveled for pleasure, never pursued hobbies that interested me, never made decisions based purely on my own happiness. For 30 years, every choice had been filtered through the question, what's best for my family? Now I was asking a different question. What's best for me? The answer surprised me. I wanted to travel. I had always been fascinated by European history, but I had never had time to visit the places I had read about. I wanted to see Rome, Paris, London, Vienna. I wanted to take cooking classes, learn languages, visit museums without worrying about getting home for family obligations. I wanted to date my wife. Sarah and I had been married for 32 years, but we had spent most of that time focused on children and business rather than each other. When was the last time we had gone to dinner without discussing Michael's needs or Emma's challenges? I wanted to make friends outside of business relationships and family connections. I realized that I didn't have a single close friendship that wasn't somehow tied to providing for or supporting other people. Most importantly, I wanted to find out who I was when I wasn't defined by my role as provider and problem. In January, I made some radical changes. First, I stopped contributing to Madison's college fund. The account already had enough money to cover 4 years at any university in the country. Additional contributions were unnecessary, especially since Robert would undoubtedly want to contribute as well. Second, I stopped answering requests for financial assistance with automatic approval. When Michael called in February asking for help with unexpected tax bills, I listened to his explanation and then said, I think you should discuss that with Robert. He has more experience with complex financial situations. Michael was stunned. But you've always helped with things like this. I've always helped with everything, I said. Maybe it's time for you to solve some problems without me. Are you punishing me for Christmas? I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making different choices about how I spend my time and money. Third, I booked a 3-week trip to Italy for Sarah and me. We would leave in April, visit Rome, Florence, Venice, and the Tuscan countryside. Sarah was initially hesitant, worried about being away for so long, but I convinced her that we deserved to prioritize our own happiness for once. The trip was revelatory. Sarah and I rediscovered each other as people rather than just parents and grandparents. We talked about books, art, history, and dreams that had nothing to do with our children's needs or problems. In Florence, I took a cooking class and discovered that I loved learning new techniques and experimenting with flavors. In Rome, Sarah developed an interest in ancient architecture that she had never known she possessed. We were happy in a way that we hadn't been in decades. Meanwhile, back home, Michael was experiencing some financial pressures without my automatic assistance. The tax bill he had asked me about turned out to be more complicated than expected, and the accountant's fees were higher than he had budgeted. He called me in Italy, frustrated and stressed. I really need help with this tax situation, he said. The penalties are getting expensive. Have you talked to Robert about it? I asked. Robert doesn't get involved in detailed financial stuff like this. That's always been your area. Your area. As if managing his financial problems was my assigned role, rather than something I had chosen to do out of love. Michael, you're a successful adult with a good income and a trust fund wife. You can handle a tax problem without your father's help, but you're better at this stuff than I am. Then learn to be better at it yourself. The conversation ended with Michael angry and me feeling both guilty and liberated. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. When Sarah and I returned from Italy, we discovered that our absence had created some interesting family dynamics. Emma had stepped up to help Michael with his tax problems, using her analytical skills to research solutions and negotiate with the IRS. She had also taken on a more active grandmother role with Madison, babysitting regularly and developing a closer relationship with Jessica. Michael had been forced to handle several household crises on his own, including a plumbing emergency and a problem with his home security system. He had managed both situations successfully, though not without complaining about the expense and inconvenience. Most surprisingly, Robert and Patricia had become less central to Michael and Jessica's daily life. Without me as a contrast figure, Robert's controlling tendencies had become more obvious to Michael. Patricia's opinions about child rearing and household management had started to feel intrusive rather than helpful. Sarah reported that Jessica had privately mentioned feeling overwhelmed by her mother's constant advice and suggestions. The dynamic that had seemed so appealing when it was contrasted with my practical, financial support had become suffocating when it was the only parental influence available. But I wasn't ready to return to my old role. The freedom I had discovered in Italy was too valuable to give up. In June, Michael called with news that Jessica was pregnant. They were excited but worried about the financial implications of a second child. The house would need renovations to accommodate another nursery. Jessica wanted to take extended maternity leave, which would reduce their income significantly. "I know you've been focused on your own stuff lately," Michael said, "but we could really use some advice about managing these expenses." Advice, not money. That was progress. "Have you created a detailed budget?" I asked. "Sort of. Jessica's not great with numbers, and I've been too busy to really dive into it." "Then that's your first step. You can't make good decisions about expenses until you know exactly where your money is going." I spent an hour on the phone helping Michael think through budget categories and tracking methods. It was the kind of conversation we hadn't had in years, focused on teaching rather than providing, on empowering rather than rescuing. At the end of the call, Michael said something that surprised me. "Thanks, Dad. This was actually more helpful than just getting money would have been. Because now I understand the problems, instead of just having them disappear." That conversation marked the beginning of a new phase in our relationship. Michael started calling me for advice rather than assistance. He asked for guidance about career decisions, investment strategies, and parenting techniques. Most importantly, he started treating me like someone whose experience and wisdom had value. The respect I had been craving for years began to develop naturally when I stopped trying to buy it with financial contributions. Emma noticed the changes too. She called me in July to say that Michael had been talking about how much he appreciated my guidance with his budget and financial planning. "He said he never realized how much you actually knew about business and life," she told me. "He thought you just wrote checks." "I spent 30 years just writing checks," I admitted. "It's my fault he saw me that way." "Maybe. But you're changing that now." Emma was right. By stepping back from my role as financial problem solver, I had created space for a different kind of relationship with my children. The real test came in November when Michael called about Christmas plans. "We've been talking about Christmas," he said, "and we'd like to have it at your house this year, like we used to. What about Robert and Patricia? They'll be there too, but we want you to host. We want it to be like it was when I was growing up." I was touched, but also cautious. "What changed your mind?" Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that I will never forget. "I realized that having someone sit at the head of your table doesn't make them the head of your family. That's something you earn over time, through sacrifice and consistency and unconditional love. Robert never earned that position in our family. You did." The emotion in his voice was genuine, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, exactly, but a sense of recognition. My son was finally seeing me the way I had always hoped to be seen. "I'd be honored to host Christmas," I said. "There's one more thing," Michael added. "I want to make a toast this year about everything you've done for our family and everything I didn't appreciate when I should have." "You don't need to do that." "Yes, I do. I owe you more than money. Dad, I owe you recognition." Christmas 2024 was everything I had hoped the previous Christmas would be. Sarah and I hosted dinner for 12 people in our own dining room. I sat at the head of the table, not because I demanded it, but because everyone agreed that it was where I belonged. Robert and Patricia were polite guests, but they were clearly guests rather than hosts. The conversation was more inclusive, the atmosphere warmer, and the focus was on family connection rather than social performance. During dessert, Michael stood up to make his toast. He talked about sacrifice and dedication, about the difference between providing money and providing leadership, about the lessons he was finally old enough to understand. "My father built this family through 30 years of putting our needs before his own," he said. "He never asked for credit or recognition. He just worked and sacrificed and loved us unconditionally. It took me too long to understand what that meant, but I understand it now." He looked directly at me. "Dad, You've always been the patriarch of this family. I'm sorry it took me so long to acknowledge that. Everyone raised their glasses, including Robert, who seemed to understand that the family dynamics had shifted permanently. But the moment that meant the most to me came later, when Madison climbed into my lap and said, "Grandpa John, will you read me a story?" Not John. Grandpa John. Sarah and I were no longer first names in Madison's vocabulary. We were grandparents, with all the love and authority that role implied. The year since that Christmas has been the best year of my adult life. My relationship with Michael is stronger than it has ever been. He calls regularly for advice, includes me in major decisions, and treats me with the respect I had craved for so long. Emma and I have grown closer too. She has come to appreciate my practical wisdom and business experience, while I have learned to admire her independence and determination. Sarah and I have continued traveling, taking cooking classes, and rediscovering our relationship outside of our roles as parents and grandparents. We are planning a trip to Japan next spring. Most importantly, I have learned the difference between being needed and being valued. For 30 years, my family needed my financial support, but they didn't necessarily value my wisdom, experience, or guidance. Now they need me less, but value me more, and that exchange has been worth every dollar I stop spending. The lesson I learned is simple, but profound. You cannot buy respect or love with money. You can buy dependency, gratitude, and accommodation. But those are not the same as genuine appreciation and affection. When I stopped trying to purchase my place in the family and started earning it through wisdom and guidance, everything changed. My son pushed me away from the Christmas table that I had paid for, in the house that I had helped purchase. But in doing so, he taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Sometimes you have to step back to move forward. Sometimes you have to stop giving to start receiving. Sometimes you have to risk losing everything to discover what you actually have. Today, I sit at the head of my own Christmas table not because I paid for it, but because I earned the right to be there through decades of love, sacrifice, and finally, wisdom. That's a position that no one can buy and no one can take away. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. And remember, sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is teaching them to value you for who you are, not what you can provide. Re-enjoying this story? Subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. I didn't mind the expense. Every dollar spent on my children felt like an investment in their future happiness. When Michael needed a car for his senior year, I bought him a reliable Honda Civic. When Emma wanted to attend a prestigious summer arts program in California, I found the $8,000 somehow. The business continued to expand. By my 45th birthday, I had 12 employees and a client base that included several major corporations in the tri-state area. The money was good, very good. Our annual household income had reached $400,000, putting us firmly in the upper middle class. But success came with its own challenges. The more successful I became, the more time the business demanded. I missed school plays, soccer games, family dinners. Sarah often joked that she felt like a single mother, and looking back, I realized there was more truth and humor in that statement. When Michael graduated from high school with a 4.2 GPA and a full scholarship to Columbia University, I felt vindicated. All those missed dinners, all those late nights, all that sacrifice had been worth it. My son was going to have opportunities I never had. Emma followed a different path, but equally successful. She studied music therapy at NYU, a program that cost $60,000 a year. I paid every penny without complaint. She was passionate about helping children with disabilities through music, and I admired her compassion. During their college years, I continued supporting them financially. Rent, food, books, spending money. Michael lived in a nice apartment near campus that cost $3,000 a month. Emma shared a place in Brooklyn for $2,500. I calculated that over their 4 years of college, I spent approximately $320,000 on their education and living expenses, beyond what scholarships covered. They both graduated with honors. Michael landed a position at a major investment firm. Emma started working with a nonprofit organization that provided music therapy for special needs children. I was proud of both of them, proud of the adults they had become, But somewhere along the way, something had shifted in our family dynamic. The sacrifice and dedication I had shown for 30 years had become expected rather than appreciated. When I suggested family dinners or weekend visits, they were always too busy. When primera calle conversations were brief and distracted. Sarah and I had grown apart too. She had her own interests, her book club, her charity work, her yoga classes. We lived in the same house, but we had become strangers who shared expenses and occasionally discussed scheduling. When Michael was 28, he met Jessica. She was intelligent, successful, and came from a wealthy family in Manhattan. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels. Her mother was on the boards of several major charities. They lived in a world of country clubs and charity galas that I had worked my entire life to provide for my family, but had never actually entered myself. The engagement was announced 6 months after they started dating. The wedding was planned for December, a lavish affair that would cost more than some people's houses. Michael asked me to contribute $25,000 toward the wedding expenses. Jessica's family was paying for most of it, he explained, but they thought it was appropriate for both families to contribute. $25,000. I had spent more than that on his college textbooks over 4 years, but somehow this felt different. This felt like I was being asked to buy my way into my son's new life. I wrote the check. The wedding was beautiful, held at the Plaza Hotel, 300 guests, a 7-course dinner, and a live band that had played 4 celebrities. I wore my best suit and tried to fit in with Jessica's family and friends. They were polite but distant, making conversation about things I didn't understand or care about. During the reception, I sat at table 12, not the family table. Sarah was at table 8. We were scattered among Michael's college friends and Jessica's extended family. I watched my son dance with his new wife and felt like I was observing someone else's life. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. After the wedding, Michael and Jessica moved into a beautiful apartment on the Upper East Side. Rent was $8,000 a month, paid for by Jessica's trust fund. Michael's salary was good, but not good enough to afford that lifestyle on his own. Emma had also gotten married to a fellow musician named David. Their wedding was smaller, more intimate, but still cost me $15,000. They lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, and both worked in non-profit organizations. They were happy, but always struggling financially. I found myself in a strange position. My business was more successful than ever. The house was paid off. Sarah and I had significant savings and investments, but my children, now adults with their own lives, seemed to need me only when they needed money. When Emma and David wanted to buy their first house, they asked for help with a down payment, $40,000. When Michael and Jessica decided to renovate their kitchen, Michael mentioned how expensive contractors were in Manhattan. I offered to help, contributing $30,000. Every request was presented as a temporary loan, but the repayments never materialized. Not that I was keeping track for collection purposes, but I noticed the pattern. The grandchildren arrived within 2 years of each other. Emma had twins, Sophie and Daniel. Michael and Jessica had a daughter, Madison. Suddenly, I was a grandfather 3 times over, and I threw myself into that role with the same intensity I had brought to fatherhood. I set up college funds for all 3 grandchildren, contributing $2,000 monthly to each account. I paid for daycare when Emma went back to work. I bought Madison's crib, her changing table, her entire nursery furniture set. But the more I gave, the more distant my children seemed to become. Phone calls became even less frequent. Family gatherings were scheduled around their convenience, often with little notice for Sarah and me. The first real crack in our relationship came 2 years ago. Emma had been struggling with postpartum depression after the twins were born. David was supportive but overwhelmed, trying to manage 2 infants while Emma recovered. I offered to pay for a nanny, someone who could help during the day while David worked. Emma initially seemed grateful, but then she called me crying. The nanny I had hired was too expensive, she said. Her friends were judging her for having help when they were all managing on their own. She felt guilty and inadequate. I tried to explain that there was nothing wrong with accepting help, that I wanted to make her life easier, not more complicated. But Emma was adamant. She wanted to handle things herself, even if it meant struggling. I respected her decision, but I was hurt by the rejection. For 30 years, My way of showing love had been through providing, through solving problems with resources and planning. Now my own daughter was telling me that my help was making her feel worse. Michael had his own version of this dynamic. As his career progressed and Jessica's family connections opened doors for him, he seemed to need me less and less, but he still expected the financial support to continue. When Madison turned to Michael and Jessica, decided they wanted to buy a house in Scarsdale, the same town where Sarah and I lived. The house they wanted was worth $2 million. Even with Jessica's trust fund and Michael's growing salary, they needed help with the down payment. Michael didn't ask directly. Instead, he mentioned how nice it would be for Madison to grow up near her grandparents. He talked about how the Scarsdale schools were some of the best in the country, how the house had a backyard where Madison could play safely. The implication was clear. I could make this happen for them. I could ensure that my granddaughter grew up in the same privileged environment I had worked so hard to achieve for my own children. I contributed $150,000 to their down payment. The house was beautiful. Colonial style, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a perfectly manicured lawn. Michael and Jessica moved in last spring, and for a few months, it felt like the family was coming back together. Madison loved having so much space to run around. Em and David brought the twins over for playdates. Sarah and I were invited for Sunday dinners occasionally. It seemed like my investment had paid off in the form of family closeness, but Jessica's parents were also frequent visitors to the new house. Her father, Robert, was a commanding presence, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from generational wealth. He had opinions about everything from politics to landscaping, and Michael seemed to hang on every word. Jessica's mother, Patricia, was equally intimidating in her own way. She spoke about charity work and social obligations with an authority that made it clear she expected others to defer to her judgment. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. I tried to like them. They were polite to me, included me in conversations, and seemed to appreciate that I had helped make Michael and Jessica's dream house possible. But there was always an undercurrent of judgment, a sense that I was being evaluated and found somewhat lacking. Robert had strong opinions about business, despite never having built a company from scratch the way I had. Patricia had views about child rearing that contradicted some of the choices Sarah and I had made with our own children. They never said anything directly critical, but their comments were loaded with implications. The breaking point began building in November. Michael called to discuss Christmas plans. For the past 5 years, Sarah and I had hosted Christmas dinner. It was one of the few times the entire family gathered in our house, and I looked forward to it all year. But this year, Michael had a different idea. Jessica's parents wanted to host Christmas at Michael and Jessica's house. It would be more convenient, he explained, since Madison was still young and would be more comfortable in her own environment. I understood the logic, but I was disappointed. Hosting Christmas had become my tradition, my way of bringing everyone together in the house where Michael and Emma had grown up. Michael sensed my hesitation and quickly added that Sarah and I were obviously invited. We would just be guests instead of hosts. Jessica's parents would handle the meal and the preparations. Sarah was actually relieved. She had been feeling overwhelmed by the work involved in hosting, and the prospect of being a guest at someone else's dinner sounded appealing to her. I agreed, but with mixed feelings. The problems started immediately. Patricia took charge of the menu planning and sent out detailed instructions about what each family should bring. Emma and David were assigned appetizers. Sarah and I were asked to bring wine and dessert, but the instructions were specific to the point of being controlling. The wine had to be from certain vineyards. The dessert had to complement the meal Patricia had planned, which meant no traditional Christmas cookies or pies. She suggested a sophisticated tart from a specific bakery in Manhattan. I found myself spending more on wine and dessert than I typically spent on an entire Christmas dinner. But I wanted to follow the rules and keep peace in the family. The seating arrangements were the next issue. Patricia had created a detailed seating chart for the formal dining room. Robert would sit at the head of the table, Patricia at the other end. Michael and Jessica were positioned as the hosts, flanked by Jessica's siblings and their spouses. Sarah and I were seated with Emma, David, and the children at what was essentially a secondary table in the living room. When I called Michael to discuss this arrangement, He explained that the dining room table only seated 12 people comfortably, and with Jessica's extended family visiting for Christmas, space was limited. I pointed out that Sarah and I had contributed significantly to the purchase of this house, including the dining room table that was now too small to include us. Michael got defensive, saying that I was making everything about money and that family was more important than who sat where. He was right about family being more important, but he was wrong about my motivations. It wasn't about the money I had spent, it was about being relegated to the children's table in a house that I had helped purchase for Christmas dinner that I had hosted for 5 years. But I didn't want to start a fight 3 weeks before Christmas. I told Michael that Sarah and I would be happy to sit wherever we were needed. The week before Christmas, Patricia called Sarah directly to discuss final preparations. During that conversation, she mentioned that Robert had some special dietary restrictions that she hadn't shared earlier. He couldn't have sodium, gluten, or sugar. This meant that most of the traditional Christmas dishes were off the table. Sarah spent 2 days researching and shopping for ingredients to make alternative dishes that would meet Robert's requirements while still feeling festive. The grocery bill for our contributions doubled, but Sarah was determined to be helpful. Christmas Eve arrived, and Sarah spent the morning preparing our assigned items. The special tart from the Manhattan Bakery cost $80, but it looked beautiful. The wine was from a vineyard Robert had specifically recommended, 2 bottles that cost $120 each. We arrived at Michael and Jessica's house at 4 o'clock. As requested, the house looked spectacular. Patricia had hired a decorator to transform the space into something from a magazine. There were fresh flowers in every room, candles everywhere, and a Christmas tree that must have cost more than most people's monthly rent. Robert answered the door wearing a cashmere sweater and perfectly pressed slacks. He shook my hand firmly and complimented the wine selection. Patricia appeared moments later, erasing Sarah, and examining our dessert contribution with approval. Emma and David arrived shortly after us, carrying their appetizer contributions and trying to manage the twins who were excited by all the decorations and activity. Jessica's siblings and their families filled the house with sophisticated conversation and expensive clothing. Everyone seemed to know each other well, sharing inside jokes and references to shared experiences that Sarah and I weren't part of. Michael was in his element, playing the role of successful host and devoted son-in-law. He made sure Robert's drink was always full, laughed at Patricia's stories, and seemed completely comfortable in this environment that felt foreign to me. Madison was adorable, running between adults in a red velvet dress that probably cost more than most children's entire Christmas wardrobe. She was polite and well-behaved, but she seemed more attached to Patricia than to Sarah, calling Jessica's mother grandmama, while referring to us by our first names. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. Dinner was served at 6 o'clock sharp. The dining room looked like something from a movie, with crystal glasses, fine china, and silverware that caught the candlelight perfectly. Robert took his seat at the head of the table with the natural authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. The conversation during dinner was lively, but exclusive. Robert told stories about his business dealings with famous people. Patricia described charity events where she had rubbed shoulders with celebrities and politicians. Jessica's siblings shared updates about their careers in fashion and law, dropping names and references that were meant to impress. From our table in the living room, Sarah and I could hear everything but couldn't really participate. Emma tried to bridge the gap by asking questions and showing interest, but David was struggling to manage the twins who were getting tired and cranky. Michael occasionally looked our way and smiled, but he was clearly focused on the main table and the conversations happening there. After dinner, everyone moved to the living room for gift exchange. The presents under the tree were wrapped in coordinating paper and arranged with the precision of a retail display. Robert and Patricia had brought gifts that were clearly expensive. Jewelry for Jessica, toys for Madison that were both educational and costly. I had brought gifts too, carefully chosen and wrapped by Sarah. For Michael, I had selected a watch that I thought he would appreciate. For Jessica, a beautiful scarf. For Madison, books and educational toys that seemed appropriate for her age. But when the gift exchange began, it became clear that I had misunderstood the expectations. Robert and Patricia's gifts to Michael and Jessica were not just presents, but statements. A weekend vacation to a resort in the Caribbean, stock certificates for Jessica's portfolio, a college fund contribution from Madison that dwarfed anything I had been able to provide. My gifts seemed modest by comparison, and while Michael and Jessica thanked me politely, their excitement was clearly reserved for the more substantial offerings from Jessica's parents. The evening continued with coffee and dessert, more sophisticated conversation, and plans for future gatherings that seemed to assume Robert and Patricia's continued central role in Michael and Jessica's life. Sarah and I left around 10 o'clock, thanking our hosts and wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. Michael walked us to the door, gave us both quick hugs, and promised to call soon. Driving home, Sarah and I were both quiet. Finally, she said what I had been thinking all evening. We had felt like strangers at our own son's Christmas celebration, but Christmas Day was still ahead, and I was determined to make the best of it. We returned to Michael and Jessica's house at 2 o'clock on Christmas afternoon for the formal Christmas dinner. This time, Jessica's extended family was there in full force. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends filled every room. The dining room table had been extended with additional leaves, and there were now 14 place settings around it. Sarah and I were seated at a small table in the adjacent breakfast nook with Madison and Emma's twins. I tried to stay positive. Being with the grandchildren was actually enjoyable, and Madison was excited to show me her new toys. But as the meal progressed, I found myself feeling increasingly invisible. Robert dominated the conversation at the main table, telling elaborate stories about his business successes and sharing opinions about everything from politics to sports. Michael hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and laughing at Robert's jokes with enthusiasm I rarely saw when we spent time together. When Robert mentioned needing advice about some investments, Michael eagerly offered to research options and provide recommendations. When Patricia talked about wanting to redecorate their guest room, Jessica immediately volunteered to help with design ideas. The level of attention and deference my son and daughter-in-law showed Jessica's parents was striking, especially compared to the polite but distant relationship they maintained with Sarah and me. After the main course, Robert stood up and tapped his wine glass to get everyone's attention. He wanted to make a toast. He announced, "I want to thank Michael and Jessica for hosting this wonderful Christmas dinner," he began. "Patricia and I are so grateful to have such a beautiful family to celebrate with." He went on to talk about the importance of family traditions, the joy of watching Madison grow up, and his appreciation for being included in such special moments. Everyone raised their glasses and smiled. It was a lovely toast, but it struck me as odd that Robert was thanking my son for hosting Christmas dinner in a house that I had helped purchase at a table I had helped pay for. When Robert finished, Michael stood up to respond. He thanked Robert and Patricia for their guidance and support, mentioned how much he appreciated their wisdom and generosity, and talked about how lucky he felt to have them as second parents. Second parents. That phrase hit me like a physical blow. Michael had never described me that way, even when he was growing up and I was working 16-hour days to provide for his education and opportunities. But Robert, who had known him for less than 3 years, had somehow earned a level of respect and affection that I had never achieved despite 30 years of sacrifice. The toasts continued around the table. Jessica thanked her parents for their love and support. Patricia made a speech about the importance of family unity. Even Emma stood up to thank everyone for including her family in such a special celebration. But no one mentioned the man who had worked for 30 years to create the financial stability that made this entire gathering possible. No one acknowledged the grandfather who had paid for college educations, wedding expenses, and house down payments. I wasn't asking for a medal or a speech. I just wanted to feel like I belonged at my own son's Christmas table. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. After dinner, the men gathered in Michael's study to drink brandy and discuss business, while the women cleaned up and supervised the children. Robert held court, sharing stories about his various business ventures and asking Michael about his career plans. I tried to participate in the conversation, mentioning some of the challenges and successes I had experienced building my own accounting firm, but Robert seemed only politely interested, and the conversation quickly shifted back to his experiences and opinions. When I mentioned that I had built my business from nothing, starting with just myself, and one secretary. Robert nodded briefly and then began telling a story about acquiring his first hotel property with help from his father's banking connections. The contrast was stark. I had built something through pure determination and sacrifice. Robert had levered family wealth and connections to expand an existing empire. But in this room, his achievements seemed to carry more weight and respect. Michael asked Robert for advice about investment strategies, career advancement, and even parenting techniques. The questions he asked his father-in-law were thoughtful and detailed, seeking genuine guidance from someone he clearly admired. When was the last time Michael had asked me for advice about anything? I tried to remember, but I couldn't recall a single instance in recent years when my son had sought my counsel or opinion about any significant decision in his life. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, I found myself alone with Michael in his kitchen. He was putting away leftover food while I helped gather dishes. "This was a nice Christmas," I said, trying to keep my tone casual and positive. "Yeah, Jessica's parents really know how to put together a celebration," Michael replied. "Robert has some great ideas for next year too. Next year, already planning for Christmas 2024, and apparently Robert would be leading those plans." "I'm glad you're happy," I said. "It's important to have good relationships with Jessica's family." "They've been incredible to us," Michael said. "Robert has been like a father to me. You know, he's taught me so much about business and life. Like a father to me." Those words echoed in my head as I helped finish the cleanup and said my goodbyes. Michael hugged me briefly, thanked me for the gifts, and promised we would get together soon for dinner. Sarah and I drove home in silence again. This time, the quiet felt heavier, more permanent. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the phrase second parents and wondering how I had become secondary in my own son's life. The next few months passed. Normally, on the surface, Michael and I exchanged occasional phone calls. Sarah and I babysat Madison when Michael and Jessica had date nights. I continued contributing to the grandchildren's college funds and helping with various expenses. But something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of family dynamics. In March, Michael called to ask if I could help with some home improvements. They wanted to renovate their basement into a home office and entertainment area. The project would cost about $50,000, and while Jessica's trust fund could cover most of it, they were hoping I could contribute $20,000. I agreed, as I always did. But this time I asked Michael directly about something that had been bothering me. "Do you ever ask Robert for financial help with these projects?" Michael seemed surprised by the question. "No, not really. Robert's more of a business mentor and grandfather figure. You've always been the one who helps us with practical stuff like this." Practical stuff. That's how Michael saw my contributions. I was the practical parent who paid for things, while Robert was the respected mentor who provided wisdom and guidance. I had become a financial resource rather than a father figure. The renovation proceeded smoothly, and Michael was grateful for my contribution. But our relationship felt increasingly transactional. He called when he needed something, thanked me when I provided it, and then we returned to our separate lives. Emma's relationship with me was different, but equally distant. She appreciated my financial support, but made it clear that she wanted to be independent and self-sufficient. She rarely asked for help, and when I offered it, she often declined or accepted reluctantly. Sarah noticed the changes too. She mentioned that she felt like a babysitter rather than a grandmother when we spent time with Madison. Jessica was polite, but never seemed to truly warm up to us, while Patricia had become Madison's primary grandmother figure. Summer arrived, and Michael announced that the family was planning a vacation to the Hamptons. Robert and Patricia had rented a large house for 2 weeks, and they had invited Michael, Jessica, and Madison to join them. Emma and David were not included in this invitation. Nor were Sarah and I. Michael explained that the house wasn't large enough for everyone, and that Robert and Patricia wanted to spend quality time with their immediate family. Their immediate family. Michael, Jessica, and Madison had apparently been absorbed into Robert and Patricia's family unit, while Sarah, Emma, David, and I remained on the periphery. The vacation photos posted on social media showed Michael and Jessica relaxing on the beach, Madison playing in the sand with her grandmama Patricia, and Robert teaching Michael how to sail. They looked like the perfect extended family, complete and happy without the grandparents who had actually funded much of their lifestyle. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe, hit the like button, and share in the comments a similar experience you've had. By September, I was beginning to understand that my role in Michael's life had been permanently redefined. I was the financial benefactor, the practical problem solver, the reliable resource, but I was not the respected father figure, the trusted advisor, or the beloved patriarch. That role belonged to Robert. October brought another request for financial assistance. Michael and Jessica wanted to take Madison on a trip to Disney World, but the costs were higher than they had anticipated. They needed $3,000 to cover hotel, flights, and park tickets. I provided the money, as I always did. But this time I asked Michael a direct question. Have you ever told Robert how much financial help I've provided over the years? Michael looked uncomfortable. It's not really something that comes up in conversation. Do you think he realizes that I helped pay for this house, your wedding, your renovations, and most of the major expenses in your adult life? Dad, why are you bringing this up? You've never asked for recognition before. He was right. I had never asked for recognition. I had simply assumed that my sacrifices and contributions were understood and appreciated. But now I was realizing that they had become invisible, taken for granted to the point where they were no longer even acknowledged. I'm not asking for recognition, I said. I'm just trying to understand how things work in this family. Things work fine, Michael said, clearly wanting to end this conversation. We love you and Mom, and we're grateful for everything you do for us. But grateful wasn't the same as respectful, and love wasn't the same as the deep admiration and deference he showed Robert. November arrived, and once again the question of Christmas plans arose. This time, Michael didn't even pretend that there was a discussion to be had. Robert and Patricia would be hosting Christmas at Michael and Jessica's house again, and everyone was expected to accommodate their preferences and traditions. Sarah accepted this arrangement without complaint, but I found myself growing resentful. Christmas had been my holiday, my tradition, my opportunity to bring the family together. Now it had been transformed into Robert's showcase, and I was expected to be grateful for an invitation to attend. The final straw came 3 weeks before Christmas. Michael called to discuss the seating arrangements for Christmas dinner. This year, Robert and Patricia were bringing even more family members. Jessica's brother was coming with his wife and 2 children. Patricia's sister was visiting from California with her husband. The dining room table, even with all the extensions, would only seat 16 people. Michael had created a seating chart that prioritized Jessica's extended family, and once again, Sarah and I were assigned to a separate table with the children. But there was a new wrinkle. Robert had requested that he sit at the head of the main table, in the seat that traditionally belonged to the host. He wanted to make a special toast, Michael explained, and Patricia thought it would be appropriate for him to have the place of honor. The place of honor. At the table I had helped purchase. In the house I had helped buy. At the Christmas dinner I had funded for years. Michael, I said carefully, that's traditionally the host's seat. I know, but Robert is kind of like the patriarch of the family now. He's older, and Patricia really wants him to feel special this Christmas. The patriarch of the family. Those words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. Robert, who had known my son for 3 years, who had never missed a meal or lost a night's sleep for Michael's benefit, who had never sacrificed a dream or worked a 16-hour day to provide for him, was now the patriarch of our family. What does that make me? I asked. You're my father, Michael said, as if that should be enough. But Robert has become like a father figure too, and Jessica's family is important to our marriage. More important than your actual family. It's not about more or less important. It's about balance and making everyone feel included. But everyone wasn't being included equally. Robert was being honored and deferred too. Sarah and I were being accommodated and managed. I told Michael I needed to think about the Christmas arrangements and would call him back. That night, I sat in my study looking at financial records from the past 30 years. The mortgage payments I had made on houses where my children grew up. The college tuition bills, the wedding expenses, the car payments, the house down payments, the renovation costs. I calculated the total amount I had spent supporting Michael's life and dreams. The number was staggering, well over $600,000, not counting the ongoing monthly contributions to Madison's college fund. $600,000, and I was now considered secondary to a man who had contributed nothing but opinions and social connections. Sarah found me there at 2 a.m, surrounded by financial documents and calculations. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying to understand how I became irrelevant in my own family. Sarah sat down beside me and looked at the papers spread across my desk. "You're not irrelevant. Michael loves you. He loves my checkbook," I said. "There's a difference." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised me. "Maybe it's time to stop writing checks and see what happens." "What do you mean?" "Maybe it's time to let Michael and Jessica figure out their own financial problems. Maybe it's time to see how much they value your relationship when money isn't part of the equation." Sarah's suggestion was radical and terrifying. For 30 years, my identity as a father had been built around providing and solving problems. If I wasn't the reliable financial resource, what would my role be? But her point was valid. If I wanted to understand whether my family valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide, I needed to separate those two things. The next morning, I called Michael back about the Christmas seating arrangements. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began. "If Robert is the patriarch of the family now, maybe it makes more sense for him to host Christmas at his own house." Michael seemed confused. "But we've already planned everything for our house." "I understand, but I think it's important to be consistent. If Robert is going to sit at the head of the table and make the patriarch's toast, he should probably take full responsibility for hosting duties." "Dan, you're overthinking this. It's just a seating arrangement." "It's not just a seating arrangement, Michael. It's a statement about hierarchy and respect in this family." I could hear Michael getting frustrated. "Why are you making this so complicated? We just want everyone to have a nice Christmas. Then let Robert handle the hosting responsibilities that go with his new role as family patriarch." The conversation ended awkwardly, with Michael saying he needed to discuss options with Jessica and her parents. "If Jew